All right. Let's talk a little bit about medical advocacy. So, um, obviously, we talked some about advocacy in general, but just kind of things specific to medical related stuff. So, it'll happen typically under two different settings. You might experience this. SARP calls. Um, do you guys know what SARP calls are? I've said that word a lot. And okay, so it's a sexual assault response program. Basically, if somebody shows up to the ER reporting a sexual assault, or if police bring them there because they report a crime, um, we meet them at the hospital. The hospital calls us and says we have a client, and whoever's the on-call person goes and meets them and offers services and to be there with them. Half the time they say, we're fine. Half the time yeah. Half the time, sometimes you just sit there. Sometimes they want you to be in the room during the exam. Sometimes they just need a process. Sometimes they need help after it. Yeah, so that's what SARP is. You all will be on the SARP calendar at some point. Kayla will have you shadow a couple times, but yeah, you're on for 24 hours at a time, 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. and uh, like 2 or 3 days in a month. Start out. So yeah. Okay, so if you're on a SARP call, obviously you're going to be in the hospital, right? You're going to be in the ER. You'll get pretty familiar with the ER. It's kind of weird, I know, like the whole layout now. It feels strange. But given the nature of those, survivor is likely to be in crisis, right? This probably just happened, like a few hours ago, maybe. You it's best for if they're trying to get a FNE exam to get it done within 3 days. So it might have been a few days ago, but most often it's like in the last 6 hours or something. So they're going to be in crisis, right? And they're really going to need your help, de-escalating and communicating as well. Typically, they also just kind of need reassurance because they don't really know what to expect. People don't, most people haven't experienced the hospital part of that before, so they don't really know what to expect. Understand some nurses are great. Sometimes they're not treated with a lot of gentleness by staff. I think if you've ever been to the ER, you've probably had some experiences with nurses on vacation, right? Sometimes that's what we get. So just understand that you might be walking into a situation where they're already feeling kind of not heard, frustrated. So one of the first things I always try to do is just like check in on that, like how is it going here? Are they treating you well? Most of the time they say yes. Occasionally they have a complaint, and we report it to Kayla, and she reports it to the nurse supervisor, and the nurse supervisor is actually awesome. She takes care of it and stuff happens. So if you ever have something happen, or you feel that the nurse is pressuring them, or just not listening to them very well, you can always escalate to Kayla, and we can get some stuff done around that. Kayla Young. So, yeah, so she's the manager of sexual assault manager, right? So she manages all the SARP calendar and everything. So to some extent, if you do SARP, she's kind of your manager, even if she's not your direct manager. Okay. Okay. I think I said this yesterday. FNE is functional nurse examiner. It's basically a special training, excuse me, that regular nurse can get to administer what is kind of commonly called like a rape kit, which is the gathering of evidence, and then also doing the exam for any injuries, essentially. So they're different than the regular nurses. They have extra training, and they actually aren't part of, like, they're not staff at St. Peter's. It could be St. Peter's, or it could be the new ER, the multi-care one over by Fred Meyer. could be either of those, but most of them are St. Peter's that we respond to. Yeah, one of those locations. Yeah. Nope. I'm not sure why, but they don't. Yeah, I think they don't have the capacity, or I don't know. Um, but like police and stuff, no St. Peter's. I'm not sure exactly what the reasons are behind this, but anyways, but so they're part of an independent organization, and they have they're on call like we are, but they have a large territory. Like oftentimes it'll be like Thurston and Pierce County, so they might be a little ways away. We're supposed to be there within uh, 30 minutes, like 45 actually, I think. Um, you will usually get there before the race. Um, so just understand that they're different, and when you're there, once the FNE nurse comes, the other ones are going to leave you alone. They're not going to come check on them anymore or anything. They're not going to ask you if they need water or anything like that. So sometimes you got to be that person and go bug the nurses to get something for them. But in my experience, the FNEs, the ones I've seen, have all been awesome, caring people. So I've been really impressed with them. Um, just like police or other people, they may or may not be trauma informed, but at least the FNEs I've seen have been pretty well. Um, understanding, they're gentle, they kind of understand the context and sort of what the victim is going through in that moment. So they've been, I think, some good things. Occasionally, one of the nurses, or the FME or the regular nurse, it's probably more likely the regular nurse, might be pressuring the survivor in some way to say, you need to do a police report, you need to do this exam, you know, uh, you need to take screenshots of all your text messages with this person, whatever. Which is a great idea if they want to press charges, but we don't want to pressure them to do that. Um, we always say it's an option, but it's up to you. So understand that sometimes that might happen, and you might have to uh, advocate for that person. Um, they may not feel comfortable speaking up against like a medical person. Um, and in ERs they got a lot of stuff going on, so sometimes the nurses can be pretty impatient and dismissive. There was one that I responded to, and what was the reason? For some reason, it took 8 hours for the FNE to get there. There's something with like 8 hours. Yeah, there's something with like they were changing shifts, and the other one had to stay late for her shift to finish up another one. And anyway, it took 8 hours, which was absurd. Yeah, yeah. Well, I did. I offered to. Yeah. I said, "You want me to go and call me when they get here, or what?" And she's like, "Can you just stay?" I just waited, and she just kind of slept. Yeah. Um, where was I going with that? Oh, she this woman had an issue with panic attacks. So she had some sort of acute panic attack med that she had at home. She didn't bring with her because she wasn't planning to go to the hospital, right? So she was kind of starting to panic a little bit, and I I said, "Do you want me to go ask them if I can get you the meds, right? And you're used to these." And anyways, I asked 3 times over like 3 hours, and I never got her any. So I'm like, I get there's like, you know, gunshot victim over there or something, but like, you know, get her some meds. So that was frustrating, and she was getting really frustrated too. And there was a couple times where she was like, "I'm just gonna leave." They can do, you know, um, but they kind of delayed her long enough that the nurse finally got there, and then they did the exam. So I was happy that was able to get done, but I also understand. I also understand where he wanted to go. He had been there since like 10 p.m. the night before, and it was now like 8 a.m. and he kind of slept on it. He didn't want to be there anymore. So talked about those. We'll skip ahead on that. Okay, things you want to do on a start call. Kayla Y tomorrow we'll be talking more about SARP. Um, so I'm just touching on a few things, but there'll be a lot more depth on it tomorrow. Safety planning is huge, so you want to make sure you do safety planning. First question is, do you have somewhere safe to go tonight or when you leave here? If they don't, we can offer them a hotel. Next question I ask is, do you have transportation? If they don't, we can give them a cab to the hotel. And then I ask, we can give them gift cards too. So probably Kayla Y will give you a gift card. Just keep it in my wallet so it's just there. And it can be used at SafePlace, Red Meyer, so gas, groceries, hygiene, whatever they need, right? So then I'll ask them, do you need anything? For example, one of the ones I went to, the police took the bed sheets as evidence. If you have a bed sheet. Because I have a place to go. I can go home. It's fine, but I don't have bed sheets. So I think that one we actually gave her some bed sheets because we had some here. But she could also use the gift card for that. And then that way also we're not giving them cash, right? Protects us a little bit too. I don't know what to tell the truth. We're pretty much always offer them on these. I don't know where the funding comes from exactly. We can give them for like people to come in here or at shelter too. We just don't mention it to everybody automatically unless it kind of comes up. So we're a little more careful with. Yeah, we're a little more careful with them outside of SARP, but for SARP, it's like you'll need to call manager if they want a hotel. You'll need to call manager if they need a cab, but it's like 99% going to be a yes. We tend to just trust them and not ask a lot of questions because it's not really a great time to be like, are you telling the truth? Like just give them the benefit of the doubt for at least those circumstances. Okay. Safety planning. So that also will be, okay, so you'll talk about basic needs, transportation, shelter. You usually will want to ask them, what is your living situation? Do you live with a partner, or your abuser, whatever? Do they know where you live? They have access to keys, those kind of things. The reason we ask that is to see if they need help with relocation or getting housing of their own. And that would be something that we'd follow up with, have one of the housing people follow up with them the next day. Kayla will talk a little bit more about the process for that particular. But let's see, what else? A lot of times they just kind of need a contact person to just sort of vent to a little bit. So typically, whether there's specific things I'm following up with them about that we talked about, I always just kind of text them and how they're doing for, the week after or something, every couple of days. Sometimes we'll recommend, we'll ask them if they want to be part of the support group, which is getting restarted. That's something we can offer. And then in terms of like, if they have appointments or things like that related to it, so like, I think I said this yesterday, but I've been taking her to therapy appointments if she doesn't have transportation. So, and that, it could be because of transportation, it could also just be because they have a lot of anxiety about it. They're uncomfortable, they see another person there. In general, my feeling is we say yes to most things in those situations. Until we need to say no if we need to, but yeah, in general, I think we just try to give it we can. Okay. So if you're going to other medical appointments like therapy or doctor's appointment or things like that, or court, like I went to court with one woman for the arraignment of the guy who assaulted her. Our main goal is to just help amplify their autonomy. So that might mean we're helping them communicate with staff of wherever we are. So like when we went to court, there's a advocate that works for the prosecutor's office um, who was like asking about the victim's feelings about potential sentencing that she thought was appropriate, um, and so I had to kind of help that conversation because the client kind of didn't understand a lot of the terminology. Um, let me see the other one. I forget where I was going with that. We also listened for potential resources that we can offer. So you might hear something in those conversations that um, is just a new piece of information to you, or something that you're like, oh, that's something I'm going to ask them about that I haven't asked them about yet. So it's a good way for you to kind of find those things. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is for that same case, just a couple days ago, well, a couple weeks ago, me and that client went and met with the prosecutor and basically had the same conversation we had with someone else at the arraignment about what she wanted for sentencing and stuff. And um, the prosecutor was like, okay, well, we're going to offer him a plea deal. Um, so I'll send you the plea deal. If it's acceptable to you guys, then we'll offer it to him, give him the opportunity to accept it or not. And then if he doesn't, get stuck. So that case, that circumstance was explaining what the plea deal was to the client. She didn't really understand a lot of it. And in the end, she said, that's okay, I'm happy with that. And I'll always just provide encouragement and support. I've mentioned most of these. Let's see. Potentially, we might connect them with shelter for a short-term type situation if it's not an urgent relocation, but they kind of need to get somewhere. You might connect them to shelter. We have some capacity for therapy, although they're full right now, unfortunately. I hope that we can expand that. Like I said earlier, we can give them emergency phone gift cards. Monday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is legal drop-in, so they can come drop in and get help from any of the legal staff with anything legal related, to be honest. We also have legal clinic on Thursday. I think it's the first and second Thursday. First and third Thursday, thank you. Legal drop with our staff. The Thursday is outside people, but they're attorneys. So they have more expertise, basically, is what it sounds like. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we have any attorneys. That would be cool if we had one on staff. I wish we also had the funding to have a full-time therapist on staff. Because the one we have is contracted through another agency, and she has like not a lot, like 10 hours a week to give to us. So it's pretty limited. Which isn't her fault, but it's limiting. What I've learned is most of the services related to like domestic violence support are like funded at the county level. So like we kind of have our network in Thurston County. There's kind of similar agencies in other counties as well. So like the 14-year-old girl, I don't know why, but she was from Grace Harbor County, and for some reason they came to St. Peter's. So I said the best thing for me to do would be connecting with them because they actually are in Aberdeen near where you are. And I said, if you can't get a hold of them, call me and I'll help you. But they would be best. So if you don't know where to go, there's definitely other agencies. talk to a manager, talk to people at shelter. You can call helpline. They have a pretty good awareness of what's in Pierce County and what's in Lewis County. You can also just Google, Lewis County. That's what I did. Grace Harbor County Domestic Violence Agency. First thing that came up. Yeah, wow. So, Callie, what's something that they would come to you for legal drop-in? What would you be able to help them with? Hmm. We can help to some extent, depending on what we have with things like clothing and hygiene. We have tons of blankets. We have some kids' toys. We have like some kids' uh, art supplies, coloring books, and things like that. Um, Out front, we have all kinds of pads and tampons and stuff that people can take, um, socks, things like that. We don't often have a lot of clothing with kids, and if we do, it goes pretty quick. So, and donations are sort of sporadic. I kind of wish we would set it up for like ongoing donations instead of one-time donations. I guess we have people that agree, every 2 months I'll make a donation. But something we could at least have some stability, but it is what it is. Um, we don't always have things. So if you think we might, look around, talk to Ashton. Ashton has a good idea of what we do have, and in general, Ashton will give you if they have it. So, one of the things I think is interesting about here is like I start off thinking about like where do we have gaps in services, and you identify all these little things, and oh, well, we could do this, and we could do that. And what I appreciate is that in general, Matthew and leadership here is open to those things. Like I set up that self-defense thing because it was just something I like that might be helpful for people who are in fear of safety for their safety, right? And we hadn't done it in the past. And anyways, now we're going to try and get it set up so we can offer that to clients too. Um, Imagine that could be super helpful for them. So we'll see how long this takes. We may not get through all this today. If we don't, we'll just continue on. So the plan is tomorrow, Kayla Y will be here talking about SARP in the morning. It might go a little bit in the afternoon, but it won't be the full day. So if we need more time, we can finish this up tomorrow. And then Thursday, Kayla V will be talking about legal. Will be the same kind of thing. We'll probably end around lunchtime a little bit after. Um, and yeah, so if there's anything that comes up that we need to do the last couple of bits, we'll do them there. But pretty much we'll be done on Thursday. All right, so this one in particular, please add your thoughts and comments because I do my best to consider all perspectives here, but I have my own blind spots biases as well. So uh, I appreciate if you're like, you're really missing this perspective. I appreciate that feedback because it helps me make it better for the next week. That's true actually in general for anything about this act. So at the end of the day today, I'm going to ask you guys for a little bit of feedback and like really please criticize me. I want to, this is like my teacher background past is like, I'm always like, how can I be better? How can I do better? How can I do better? And I have pretty thick skin, so I won't be offended. All right, this one, if we get through them, topics we're going through, we're going to talk about the timeline of our organization, a philosophy statement, a little bit of history of feminism, culture statement. We'll talk about oppression, what that is, talk about emotional intelligence, diversity, inclusive education, culturally competent conflict resolution, and equity in the workplace. So, 1981, rape relief and the women's shelter, which were both part of the YWCA of Olympia, combine and create SafePlace. Rape relief was the original name, women's shelter. So, it's been what, 43 years now. This is pretty cool if you think about it. I've met um, like elderly people in their 70s who are like, when I was in my 30s, I came to SafePlace. It was pretty cool. We did this one. There's a church nearby um, that was doing. I forget what the occasion was, but they were doing a special service that was focused on survivors of abuse. Um, and they asked us to be there, just to be present and be a resource for the people that were there for that. And like a bunch of them were older people, like in their 70s and 80s, who that's way in their past, but they had their own experiences and they were there to like support. And so that was really cool to see. So there was definitely some younger people that seemed like they were in the middle of it. Um, one of the coolest churches I've ever been to. Someone across from the Capitol with like a giant pride flag on the side. Yeah, they're awesome. They're yeah, super open-minded people. Yeah. Okay, 1983, Olympia City Council passes ordinance to stiffer penalties in domestic violence cases. 84, Washington State law goes into effect, which increases law enforcement requirements for domestic violence calls, including mandatory arrest. 87, SafePlace works with the City of Olympia to change local zoning laws, ensuring confidentiality of shelter locations. Um, 89, the first shelter is purchased after a 3-year fundraising campaign. 91, we start 2 support groups, one for female caretakers of sexually assaulted youth, and another for the youth themselves. I think that's something we might want to consider starting again. So 93, business office lost their lease, funding is cut, services were cut. Unfortunately, 95, we implement 24-hour staffing at the shelter and renovate it for ADA accessibility. 96, we start expanding services to Spanish-speaking community with a bilingual staff. In the past, we've had dedicated Spanish language advocates. We don't have those right now, but we do have a couple Spanish speakers. Paula, Matthew speaks Spanish. Those are the 2 I'm aware of. Oh, Sandy, who works at the shelter. Do you guys know of anyone else? Okay, cool. And Veronica, when she was here. Let's see. 2004, we started our free legal clinic, which legally they used to be called Thurston County Volunteer Legal Services. So you might see this acronym or that. They're the same group. They just changed their name. Started working with them in 2004. 2007, the new shelter opens. Free legal clinic expands service days. 2010, SafePlace and Mijas, a transitional restaurant supporting Spanish-speaking survivors, win the Spirit Advocacy Award from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. 2012, we received federal grant from Office on Violence Against Women to expand sexual assault services. So prior to that, we had been focused almost exclusively on domestic violence. Of course, there's a lot of crossover there, but they are somewhat distinct too. 2013, we started Speak, which was part of my old position, and whoever gets hired as a new prevention specialist will take this over. It stands for Safe Place, Peer Education, and Knowledge, and essentially it's a group of high school leadership opportunities for high school students to learn more and educate themselves. Also, they go with and actually pretty much do the presentations to a lot of the schools we have, and gives them an opportunity to be kind of like field leaders. So if you're familiar with like Planned Parenthood, they have teen council, it's kind of like that. So we had this last year where there was 5 people and they were from 4 different high schools, and yeah, awesome group of passionate kids. 2015, after years of fundraising, we move into our current location. That's when we started SARP in PRIA services. Um, I don't know the history on this. The SARP and PRIA are grants that we get through the state. So the state allocates money to provide SARP in every county. So in every county, there's an agency that provides the same service. These other ones are here. Same with PRIA, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. A long training. If you haven't done it yet, you will. But it's similar to SARP in that we don't often get calls for it, but a SARP call might be someone from a prison who is assaulted in custody by another inmate or staff member, something like that. All right, philosophy statement. You should have the SafePlace philosophy statement here. I'll give you guys like 3 minutes. Just read through it, just so you're aware of what it says. Good. Any thoughts? Things you noticed that stood out to you? The reason I have us read this is kind of where a lot of the stuff that we're going to get into comes from. Why we're going to talk about things like feminism, and why we talk about um, oppression, because there's a statement in here that says, I don't remember exactly what it says, but it says basically to solve this issue, we need to not only provide services, we also need to work on breaking apart oppressive systems that are causing those circumstances. And that's why we have both response services and prevention. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of feminism and why we are explicitly called a feminist organization. So, simple definition of feminism: a belief in the political economy and cultural equality of women. Traditionally, it's separated into three waves: first, second, and third wave. And some people argue that we're in the fourth wave. We'll talk about that too. And please, if you have knowledge or of this history, then you have something to add, please do. So, first wave feminism is before 1920. This was primarily focused on dealing with property rights and the right to vote. Most people say it began in the United States in 1828 with the Seneca Falls Convention. 300 women gathered to debate Elizabeth Cady Stanton's Declaration of Sentiments, which was a document that was explaining how women had inferior status and demanding suffrage or the right to vote. This wave ended in approximately 1920 when women were granted the right to vote in the U.S. Limited women's suffrage had been introduced in Britain 2 years before that. First wave activists believed once the vote had been won, women could use its power to enact other much needed reforms related to property ownership, education, employment, and so forth. So early on, it was primarily focused on voting rights. White leaders mostly dominated this movement. They included longtime president of the International Women's Suffrage Alliance, Carrie Chapman Catt, in the U.S., and leader of the Militant Women's Social and Political Union, Emily Pankhurst, in the UK, and Catherine Holmes Spence and Vida Goldstein in Australia. So this movement being dominated by white leaders has tended to obscure the histories of non-white feminists who also were active, but we're also bringing up some different concerns as well. Popular evangelist, social reformer was Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, and they were talking about things like anti-slavery and anti-lynching as being connected to feminism as well. Okay, second wave, which was about the 60s to the 80s, was focusing more on equality and anti-discrimination. Women had the right to vote by then. They had gained some of the legal things that they were prohibited from in the past. So now they were kind of focusing on the inequalities and such that were not backed by law, that were just kind of ingrained in our culture. It started with the publication of a book called The Feminine Mystique, which drew attention to issues such as workplace quality, birth control, and abortion, and women's education. Australian feminist Germaine Greer urged women to challenge ties binding them to gender inequality and domestic servitude, and to ignore male repression like exploring sexuality. Kind of the beginning of like sex positivity movement for women, and sort of concerted efforts to really sort of break the mold of what was expected of a typical woman. A lot more women getting higher education, getting professional jobs and things like that. Of course, it still was a ton of men, but more than in the past. Okay. During this time, refuges for women and children fleeing domestic violence and sexual assault started to be established. The first few female elected officials were put in office. Yet again, though, it still remained largely unconcerned with the unique concerns of feminists outside of the white majority. That's kind of a theme for this whole thing. Black women in particular began to publish and speak out about being excluded from the movement. In the 80s, it began to draw attention to the pervasiveness of childhood sexual abuse and acquaintance rape. In the 70s, most states first enacted a law that made marital rape illegal. Not to the 70s. Yeah. And during this time, sexual harassment as well was codified into the law as illegal. Okay, that was wave 2. Wave number 3, which is approximately the 90s into the 2000s. This movement began to explicitly draw attention to intersectionality of race and gender in particular, but also sexuality, class, ethnicity, and more. This is when it kind of started opening up to be more representative of diverse voices. People in this movement were concerned that the old feminist gains were outdated and needed to be, we needed to reestablish what feminist concerns were in the modern context, because the last phase was 60s to the 80s, so some of that stuff was pretty far in the past by the 90s, right? So being a woman in America was different in 1960s than in 1990s, right? And they began to really draw focus to male privilege and white privilege. They began to focus on issues such as sexual harassment in the workplace and scarcity of women in positions of power. This was the time of the Riot Girl movement. Feminist punk bands like Bikini Kill and Pussy Riot. They sung about things like homophobia, sexual harassment, misogyny, racism, and female empowerment. I know. I was like, is that really them? Okay, and this is some debate here. I believe that we're in the fourth wave. Some people would dispute that. Fourth wave typically described as about 2013 to the present. So this fourth wave is distinct from the one before. We're now focusing on empowerment of women, but specifically with using the tools of internet and digital resources and intersectionality. Do you guys know what intersectionality means? Okay. This was a period of the Women's March and the Me Too movement, and lesser known, but around this time there was also a hashtag Men Too, which is essentially about raising awareness that it happens to men as well. Not that they were competing, but that was interesting. Continuing progress for women in some places. So around the globe, Colombia decriminalized abortion in 2022. But especially in the U.S., this period is marked by kind of some regression in social progress for some of the stuff that the prior waves had achieved. So, for example, Supreme Court overturning abortion legislation in 2022. quote, the men's rights movement and misogyny influencers have all gained quite a big audience through this time. Also during this time, there's been a more explicit focus on LGBTQ issues and identities and um, the unique experiences with that. Okay, let's look at the culture statement now. Give you a moment to read that. One of the things I like about my position is I actually care about this stuff a lot, like making an inclusive environment where people feel supported, where it's diverse, where it's accepting, where people can be themselves. Um, and I think a lot of times, like, people say that, but they don't actually create that environment. Well, that's one of the things I like about my job is I feel like I'm actually part of putting this into practice, not just with bringing things up to leadership, but also in kind of establishing culture through training and stuff like that. And I definitely have a lot of plans for how we can kind of continue to improve the organization. Um, how do we build this? How do we try to build that culture here at SafePlace? I have a goal. We have a goal of developing employees in a work culture that is skilled in emotional intelligence, including self-understanding, work style, personality types, inclusive communication with the deliberate effort to monitor our speech and the assumptions we make with our language. Work on skills with culturally competent conflict resolution, particularly cross-cultural conflict, and working on equity issues, talking about equitable opportunities, outcomes, and organizational responses, both for our employees and clients. By no means are we at the end of that road. So. All right, so oppression, because it's so linked to the systems that cause domestic violence and abuse. Oppression is the malicious and intentional and or unjust treatment of or exercise of power over a group of individuals, often in the form of governmental authority or cultural disenfranchisement, serves to benefit the dominant, discourse-setting identities at the expense of less dominant. You can add anything to that? Implying lots of people don't, right? All right. So you should have one of these. It's in black and white. You might have seen something like this before, but you'll see it's talking about relative power and privilege in these different areas. So skin color, for example, closest to the center has socially the most power is white, right? In the middle, medium would be different shades, and at the end would be dark skin people, right? And we're just saying how, in general, what levels of power and authority are you given based off of those identities? And you'll see it goes through wealth, gender, all these different other aspects. So what I would like you to do is come grab a marker or a crayon or something up here, and I want you to just color in each area, or you can just outline the box where you are in each of these areas. That makes sense? So I'd be like, I'm a heterosexual cisgender man, right? And then we'll, Anika, are you good? You all done? Cool. All right. So let's hold them up and just kind of take a visual look at each other and see where you all kind of are. Okay, a little bit all over the place. We all have some privileges, right? We all have some areas of privilege. Do you guys feel like anything is missing from this? Any category that should have been around the outside? Above just being a person of color as well, right? Is a unique, yes. No, that's a great point. I appreciate that because I think there is some truth to that. I think that there's all kinds of data that shows that, in particular, indigenous people suffer even more concentrated oppression in many ways than other groups do. I mean, an example is we were looking at the lifetime prevalence of rape, right, for women, and the indigenous one was like way above and beyond. Um, yeah, I agree. That's something that is definitely a factor as well. And it's also complex because so many people have indigenous blood, but they're mixed, so they may not present as indigenous. So some of it is what is your history, and some of it is how do people perceive you as well, right? No, it's great. This is what we're that's just like these are the conversations I want to have. It's like bring in new perspectives, right? Things we didn't consider. Um, yeah, that's kind of interesting because like one of the things I think about when I look at this is some of these are things we can change about ourselves, and some of them are not, right? Or some of them are things that might change with time. For example, I said my mental health is mostly stable. In the past, it was really bad, right? That's an important thing to my life, but that's not comparable to, like, I can't change my skin color, right? So I think that's important to understand, and also just like some of these things are a lot more visible than other things, right? Like being disabled, being visibly disabled versus having a silent disability, uh, both definitely something that makes adds challenges to your life, but to what extent might depend on what your unique thing, your unique situations are. So I think it's important that we recognize like the overall trends, right? But that we're also able to see context because I think context matters a lot. You know, there's situations where you know, okay, it says white men are above white women, but if we're in a white feminist group, their voice is above mine, right? And I think a lot of times talking about like privilege and stuff, it gets like reduced down to like really absolute, like you have all the privileges or none of the privileges, and I think the reality is we're all kind of similar. I mean, there are people that are far at the ends, but most of us are somewhere in the middle on some of these. And I think that's important to recognize, not to say that my privileges don't matter comparing my experiences to someone else, but to understand that I think that's a way that we can connect with people that are different than us as well. As we all have some ways that we can kind of relate to uh, having power or not in different situations. Mm-hmm. And also, this helps us realize that like all this is very context specific, right? Like these would be different for in another country, right? Um, it's easy to think of examples, right? Languages would be different, Some cultures being large is considered a sign of prosperity and wealth, right? Rather than being slim. Um, just a couple examples.